The morning I lost $14 billion. I was smiling for the cameras. By noon my accounts were frozen. By sunset I was under federal investigation. And by midnight, the only person who still believed in me was a man who didn't even know I was a billionaire. My name is Scarlett Whitmore. 3 months ago, I owned half the Manhattan skyline. Tonight, I'm sitting on the floor of a rented apartment with a suitcase full of cash. I withdrew before everything locked. And this is how I fell. But to understand how I lost everything, you need to understand why I built it in the first place. I grew up in a one-bedroom apartment that smelled like mildew and burnt toast. My mother worked double shifts at a diner in Queens. When she got sick, we learned exactly how expensive survival was. I was 16 the first time I heard a doctor say, "There's another treatment option, but insurance won't cover it." That sentence changes you. Teaches you that hope has a price tag. My mother died 3 months later. I remember standing in a hospital hallway thinking one thing. I will never be powerless again. Power meant money. Money meant choices. Choices meant no one I loved would ever be denied care because of a bill. So I worked. Scholarships. 2 jobs. Real estate internships where men twice my age told me to fetch coffee. I watched. I learned. I studied contracts like they were weapons. By 25, I closed my first independent deal. By 28, I was buying buildings no one else thought were salvageable, and turning them into luxury properties that doubled in value. At 32, I landed on the cover of Forbes, youngest self-made female billionaire in American real estate. They called me the Ice Empress. They thought I didn't feel. The truth was I felt too much. I just locked it away. Money became oxygen. Every acquisition was another breath. Every skyscraper another layer of armor. And I wore that armor well. The night everything began to change, I was standing in my penthouse overlooking Central Park. The city glittered like something I personally engineered. My assistant called. The London acquisition cleared. That pushes you over 15 billion. Release the statement in the morning, I said. No celebration. Just another number. Later that week, I visited a hospital I'd quietly funded. The pediatric wing had been struggling. I wired the money anonymously. No plaques. No press. I don't visit hospitals. They carry ghosts. But I walked the hallway anyway, watching nurses move briskly, watching parents sit with folded hands and tired eyes. A little boy slept beneath superhero blankets. Machines beeped steadily beside him. If it weren't for that donor, we would have shut this wing down, a nurse whispered. I turned away before my composure cracked. That's when the dizziness hit. I hadn't eaten all day. Or the day before that properly. The hallway tilted. The lights blurred. The last thing I heard was someone saying, "Ma'am." When I woke up, fluorescent lights stared down at me. And 4 tugged at my arm. A man in navy scrubs stood beside the bed, calm and focused. "You fainted," he said. "That's usually what happens when people forget they're human." "I'm fine," I replied automatically. "You were unconscious." "I have a high tolerance." "For denial?" he asked, not unkindly. He didn't recognize me. There was no flicker of awareness. No shift in tone. "Name?" he asked. I hesitated just a second. "Scarlett." "I'm Ethan," he said. "And you're staying for observation." "I don't stay." "You do tonight." I should have called my driver. My security. My assistant. Instead I stayed. The next morning he handed me coffee in a paper cup. "You need food," he said. "Coffee isn't a substitute for sleep." "Do you talk to all patients like this?" "Only the stubborn ones." He smiled slightly and something in my chest tightened. We talked. About nothing important. He grew up in Ohio. Lost his father young. Became a trauma surgeon because he understood what it felt like to sit in a waiting room and hope. When he asked what I did, I said, "I invest." "That sounds mysterious." "It's efficient." He laughed. It was the first time in years someone laughed around me without calculating my value. I returned the following week. Then the week after that. No security detail. No announcements. Just Scarlett. We drank bad cafeteria coffee. We argued about movies. He teased me about my inability to relax. For the first time since I was 16, I felt like a woman instead of an empire. It didn't last. 2 months later, A photographer caught us leaving a cafe together. By morning, headlines exploded. Scarlett Whitmore dating unknown doctor. Ethan found out from a nurse shoving her phone in his face. He showed up at my penthouse that night. Security tried to stop him. I told them to let him through. You lied, he said when the elevator doors opened. I didn't. You forgot to mention you're worth $15 billion. It wasn't relevant. It was to me. Not because of the money. Because I hadn't trusted him. I wanted to know if someone could see me without the number attached, I said quietly. And you did. He stepped inside. I don't care about your money, he said. But don't decide what I can handle. Something shifted that night. Not distance. Depth. For a while it worked. We built something quiet. Private dinners. Late-night conversations. Him falling asleep on my couch after long shifts. Me sitting in his small apartment eating takeout without caring that the couch was worn. He never treated me like I was untouchable. And I started believing maybe I wasn't. Then came the morning I lost everything. I was smiling at cameras outside a development site when my phone buzzed repeatedly. My CFO. My legal team. 3 board members. Your primary accounts have been frozen, my lawyer said when I answered. What? There's been a federal complaint filed alleging financial misconduct tied to leveraged acquisitions. That's impossible. But it wasn't impossible. It was sabotage. My senior financial advisor, the man I trusted with structuring complex debt instruments, had manipulated triggers in our earliest deals. Quietly. Strategically. Over months. By noon, my liquidity vanished. By sunset, federal investigators were at my office. By midnight, every major outlet was running the same headline. Is Scarlett Whitmore's empire built on fraud? Investors panicked. Stocks dropped. Partnerships dissolved. I moved out of my penthouse within a week. Not because I wanted to, because everything tied to active holdings was under review. I rented a small apartment in cash. White walls. No skyline. No armor. Cameras waited outside court hearings. Commentators speculated about prison time. Former allies stopped returning calls. I told Ethan to stay away. I don't want you dragged into this, I said. He showed up anyway. Reporters shouted questions at him. Did you know about her fraud? Are you benefiting from her wealth? He ignored them and opened the passenger door for me. Inside the car, I stared straight ahead. I can fix this, I said. I know, he replied. You don't understand. I built everything to avoid this exact situation. He looked at me. You built everything to avoid being powerless. Yes. You're not powerless. I have nothing. You have me. That terrified me more than losing billions. Because money is predictable. Love is not. Weeks turned into months. Legal proceedings crawled forward. Evidence surfaced that my advisor had shorted my holdings through shell entities, triggering artificial collapses for personal gain. It was calculated, cruel, and public. One night in the small apartment I finally broke. I was invisible when I was poor, I whispered. When I was rich I was feared. But I've never been loved without a condition. He knelt in front of me. I don't need your empire, he said softly. I need you to stop thinking you are one. The investigation eventually cleared me. It was financial sabotage, not fraud. Headlines shifted. Whitmore vindicated. Investors returned. Assets unfroze. Within weeks, my net worth rebounded faster than analysts predicted. But something inside me had changed. When reporters asked how it felt to be a billionaire again, I paused. Ethan stood a few feet away. It feels irrelevant, I said. Because when I had nothing, no accounts, no influence, no power, he stayed. He bought groceries. He paid rent. He never once asked what I was worth. Only whether I'd eaten. I rebuilt differently this time. Quieter. Smarter. Less obsessed with domination. I diversified control structures so no single advisor could ever corner my empire again. But I also redirected capital. Hospitals. Pediatric wings. Trauma programs. One afternoon, I took Ethan to a ribbon-cutting ceremony at the hospital where we met. He frowned when he saw the plaque. The Ethan Cole Trauma Initiative. You didn't, he said. I did. Why my name? Because you taught me something more valuable than control. And what's that? That I am not my balance sheet. He stepped closer, resting his forehead against mine. You never were. The skyline still carries my signature. But some nights I choose smaller rooms, messy kitchens, burned garlic bread, laughter that doesn't echo off marble. I built an empire because I was afraid of suffocating. I kept a man because he taught me how to breathe. I lost $14 billion in 7 days. And in the process I found the only thing I'd never been able to buy. Someone who stayed when there was nothing left to gain. The first night back in the penthouse felt unfamiliar. The marble floors were the same. The glass walls still framed the city like a masterpiece. My wardrobe had been untouched, my art preserved, my piano silently waiting in the corner. But I wasn't the same woman who had once stood here believing she was untouchable. Ethan walked in slowly, hands in his coat pockets, looking around. So this is where the Ice Empress lives, he said lightly. I almost winced at the nickname. I never liked that title. I know, he replied. You're terrible at being ice. I stepped closer to the window. The skyline shimmered below, steady and arrogant. I used to think this view meant I'd won, I said. And now I think it's just a view. He walked up behind me, not intimidated by the glass, the height, the money embedded in every surface. When everything froze, he said quietly, I was scared. I turned. Of what? That you'd choose the empire over yourself. I didn't answer immediately. Because the old version of me might have. The old version would have sacrificed sleep, love, health, anything to protect what she built. I almost did, I admitted. The night my accounts were locked, I'd considered cutting him off completely, ending things cleanly so he wouldn't see me weak. So he wouldn't see the girl from Queens who once counted coins for groceries. But you didn't, he said. No, I whispered. I didn't. The following weeks were strange. My legal team finalized settlements. My former advisor was indicted. Civil suits unraveled his shell companies one by one. Financial media praised my resilience and strategic containment. They called my comeback impressive. They had no idea the real battle had been internal. One evening, I attended a gala for one of my redevelopment projects. Cameras flashed as I stepped onto the carpet in a silver gown. Reporters asked rehearsed questions about market recovery and future expansions. Ms. Whitmore, do you feel stronger after the investigation? Stronger? I repeated. No. Just clearer. They didn't understand that answer. Ethan waited inside, uncomfortable in a tuxedo but refusing to admit it. You look like you belong in a magazine, he murmured when I reached him. I've been in one, I replied. I know. I meant this one. He gestured to the room, filled with billionaires and politicians and people who once disappeared when headlines turned ugly. I scanned the crowd. Several of them approached me with congratulatory smiles, as if they hadn't distanced themselves months earlier. Power attracts loyalty. Vulnerability reveals truth. I shook hands politely, but something inside me had shifted permanently. I no longer needed their approval. Later that night, back in the penthouse, I kicked off my heels and sat on the kitchen counter while Ethan attempted to cook. You're hovering, he said without turning around. I own the building. I can hover. He smirked. You don't own the building. I own the company that owns the building. That's worse. I laughed. The sound surprised both of us. There was a time when laughter felt indulgent. Now it felt essential. Months passed. Stability returned. My net worth climbed past where it had been before the collapse. Analysts called it a historic rebound, but I started declining certain deals. Hostile acquisitions no longer appealed to me. Projects that displaced families for luxury conversions felt hollow. Instead, I focused on mixed-income developments, medical infrastructure, quiet philanthropy that didn't require press releases. My board questioned the shift. You're leaving profit on the table, one member warned. I'm leaving regret off the table, I replied. They didn't argue after that. One afternoon, I visited the old apartment in Queens where my mother and I once lived. The building was scheduled for renovation under one of my subsidiaries. The stairwell still smelled faintly the same. I stood outside the unit door and remembered being 16, holding medical bills I couldn't decode. Back then, I thought money was the only solution. Now I knew better. Money is protection. Love is healing. That night, I told Ethan I wanted to fund a permanent endowment for emergency care in underfunded neighborhoods. No cameras, I said. No announcements. Why? He asked. Because some things don't need applause. He studied me carefully. You're different. I lost everything, I said. It rearranged me. Would you change it? The question lingered. If I could erase the investigation, the humiliation, the freezing of my accounts, would I? No, I finally answered. Why? Because if I hadn't fallen, I would have never known who would stay. He didn't respond with grand words. He just pulled me closer. The proposal wasn't cinematic. No private island. No orchestra. No fireworks over Manhattan. It happened in his small apartment, the one we'd kept even after I regained everything. He was grading medical research papers at the kitchen table. I was sitting on the counter eating strawberries. You know, he said casually, not looking up. You're terrible at letting people take care of you. I'm improving. You are. Silence settled comfortably between us. Scarlett. Yes. If everything disappeared again tomorrow, would you still choose this? I didn't hesitate. Yes. He looked up then, studying my face like he was evaluating something fragile and strong at the same time. Good, he said. Then he reached into his desk drawer. The ring wasn't extravagant. It wasn't the kind financial blogs would feature. It was simple, elegant, intentional. I don't want your empire, he said quietly. I want you. On your worst day. On your best day. When the headlines love you and when they don't. My throat tightened. I've loved you as a billionaire, he continued. And I've loved you when you had nothing accessible but cash in a suitcase. There's no version of you I don't choose. For a woman who negotiated billion-dollar contracts without flinching, I found myself speechless. Scarlett Whitmore, he said softly, will you marry me? I thought about the 16-year-old girl in the hospital hallway. I thought about the woman smiling for cameras the morning her accounts froze. I thought about sitting on the floor of a rented apartment, believing she had lost her identity. And I thought about this man, who had never once calculated my value in dollars. Yes, I whispered. The wedding was private. No exclusive coverage. No magazine spreads. We chose a small ceremony overlooking the water, just close friends and the few people who hadn't disappeared during the scandal. As I walked toward him, I realized something profound. For most of my life, I built structures that reached toward the sky. Skyscrapers. Financial empires. Fortresses of control. But this was the first thing I built that felt grounded. When we exchanged vows, there were no promises about wealth or status. Only partnership. Afterward, a reporter managed to approach us outside the venue. Ms. Whitmore, is this the happiest day of your life? I looked at Ethan before answering. It's the most honest one, I said. Years later, the skyline still changes under my direction. New towers rise. Markets fluctuate. My net worth moves like a living number. But some nights I sit on the floor of our living room, sometimes the penthouse, sometimes the smaller apartment we refused to give up. And I remember the morning I lost $14 billion. I remember the fear, the humiliation, the silence after the headlines. And I remember the one constant. He didn't stay because I was powerful. He stayed because I was human. I built an empire to avoid suffocation. I lost it and discovered I could survive. I rebuilt it and realized I didn't need it to define me. The world still calls me a billionaire. But the title that matters most? Wife, partner, woman who fell and chose to rise differently. And if tomorrow everything vanished again, I wouldn't be afraid. Because the most valuable thing I own is something money never built. Success after survival feels different. Before the fall, growth was adrenaline. Expansion was proof. Every acquisition was a declaration that I would never go back to being that powerless girl in a hospital hallway. After the fall, growth felt quieter, intentional, measured. 6 months into our marriage, I was offered the largest redevelopment contract of my career. A multi-city luxury expansion projected to double my net worth within 5 years. Old Scarlett would have signed in under 10 minutes. New Scarlett asked one question. What does this displace? The answer was uncomfortable. Entire blocks of lower-income housing. Communities pushed outward. Families relocated for profit margins. The board presented projections, charts, long-term upside. I closed the folder. "We're not doing it," I said. Silence filled the room. One director leaned forward. "You built this company on strategic boldness." "I built it on survival," I corrected. "There's a difference." That night, headlines speculated whether I'd lost my edge after the scandal. I read them from our couch while Ethan rested his head in my lap. "Does it bother you?" he asked. "No," I said honestly. It didn't. Because edge without empathy had nearly cost me everything before. Instead of that contract, I funded a hybrid development, half luxury, half subsidized housing, with a permanent medical clinic embedded into the ground floor. Analysts called it unconventional. Investors called it risky. Residents called it life-changing. For the first time, I realized something profound. Power doesn't have to dominate. It can protect. Our lives settled into a rhythm. He worked long hospital shifts. I divided time between board meetings and foundation planning. We ate late dinners, argued about dishes, debated politics without turning it into war. Sometimes I'd wake in the middle of the night panicked, heart racing, convinced my accounts were frozen again. Trauma lingers even after headlines fade. Ethan would pull me closer. "It's over," he'd murmur. But it wasn't just about money. It was about identity. I had built myself as invincible. Losing everything had revealed how fragile that illusion was. One evening, almost a year after the investigation closed, I received an email from a young woman. She wrote that she had watched my collapse unfold online, that she was building her own startup, that she was terrified of failure. "How did you survive losing everything publicly?" she asked. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed back. "I survived because I learned that losing money is not the same as losing yourself. And because I let someone see me without the armor." A week later, I was invited to speak at a private entrepreneurship forum. Normally, I would have delivered statistics and growth strategies. Instead, I told the truth. "I built my empire out of fear," I said to the room. Fear of being powerless. Fear of being poor. Fear of losing someone because I couldn't afford to save them. The audience was silent. "I thought money solved vulnerability," I continued. "It doesn't. It just delays it." Afterward, several women approached me. Not to ask about investments. To ask about survival. That mattered more. At home, Ethan listened as I recounted the speech. "You're turning into something dangerous," he teased. "How so?" "You're becoming powerful and self-aware." I smiled. "That's terrifying." "For the right reasons," he said. 2 years after the fall, we stood in the lobby of a newly opened medical center funded entirely through my foundation. It specialized in emergency care for families without insurance coverage gaps. I didn't put my name on the building, but the staff knew, and they knew why. A little girl ran past us laughing, holding her mother's hand. I froze for a second. Ethan noticed. "You okay?" "I used to be that girl," I whispered. "And now I get to make sure she doesn't lose her mother because of a bill." He squeezed my hand. There are still days the market dips and my phone lights up with urgent messages. There are still critics who believe my comeback was luck instead of strategy. There are still board members who wish I were colder. But I don't miss being untouchable. Untouchable is lonely. Vulnerable is terrifying. But it's real. On the 3rd anniversary of the day my accounts were frozen, I did something unexpected. I logged into the financial dashboard that once dictated my mood. The number stared back at me, higher than it had ever been. For a moment the old instinct flickered. Pride. Validation. Relief. Then I closed the laptop. Ethan was in the kitchen attempting to cook again. The smoke alarm went off. I walked in laughing. "You're banned from garlic," I said. I refused to accept that. I wrapped my arms around him from behind. 3 years ago, I thought losing $14 billion was the worst thing that could happen to me. Now I understand it was the most clarifying. It stripped away illusion. It revealed loyalty. It forced me to rebuild without fear as the foundation. If tomorrow everything vanished again, the towers, the investments, the headlines, I would grieve. But I wouldn't collapse. Because I no longer confuse wealth with worth. The girl in the hospital hallway built an empire to protect herself. The woman standing here learned she doesn't have to stand alone. I lost $14 billion in 7 days. I rebuilt it in 3 years. But the most valuable thing I gained during the fall was something no market can freeze. Perspective, partnership, peace. And this time, none of it is built on fear. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment rise. If you believe losing everything can sometimes be the beginning.